Hey guys, welcome to Ask Truth Apologetics. I am here to talk to you guys today about a little bit of controversy that's been going on the internet between some Christians and Muslims regarding prophecies of Muhammad in the Bible. And in fact, we're going to really kind of hone in on one of the main arguments that Muslims tend to bring up. What stimulated this controversy was a video that David Wood put out saying that if anyone could prove that Muhammad was prophesied in the Bible, that he would delete his YouTube channel. So we're going to kind of cover what he is saying, and then we're going to cover one of the main Islamic objections to it. This will end up being a few different parts of the series because with the passage that the Muslims refer to, there's quite a bit of information that we need to look into a little bit deeper so that we can put this issue to rest. But before we get into the meat of the matter, I just want to show you guys a little bit about what it was that David was saying.
I'm so confident that Muslims can't answer a simple question that I hereby agree to delete my YouTube channel if they can prove me wrong. Yes, you heard me correctly. If any Muslim can prove me wrong by answering my simple question, I will delete my YouTube channel. No more Islamicize me. No more Muhammad's boom boom room. No more wrecking history's most obvious false prophet in epic fashion. What greater feat can Muslims perform for their prophet than forcing me to shut down the YouTube channel that's destroying him? So, what's the question? It's a question about something Allah says in the Quran. In Surah 7, verse 157 of the Quran, Allah refers to followers of the Torah and the Gospel who find Muhammad mentioned in the Torah and the Gospel that they still have in their possession. Let's read a few translations.
All right, guys. So that is essentially his argument. Now, I will have that video itself in a link so you guys can go and watch that video in its entirety. And then he and Sam Shamoon did a live stream, I believe that evening or the next day, after quite a few people had put out attempted refutation videos. And one of the main objections that they get is they say, look, Muhammad was prophesied in the book of Isaiah chapter 42. What I found interesting actually is the first time I saw this this attempt to say where Muhammad was in the Bible was through a YouTube channel called Merciful Servant. They're a Muslim YouTube channel. And since then, I think they've actually taken their video down. So I don't know if they had been refuted enough times to where they were embarrassed enough to take it down, or if I just had a hard time finding it. But I did find basically their video shown on a different YouTube channel known as EF Dawa. So I will make sure to include the link to that video as well. So I will give you the really brief introduction to what the Muslim claim is regarding Isaiah 42.
The 42nd chapter of the book of Isaiah in the Bible clearly foretells the coming of an Arabian prophet, specifically Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. Isaiah describes itself as a prophecy about the future. The former things have taken place, and new things I declare. Isaiah describes a very special person that God will send. My servant, whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. At least three.
All right, so you will see that he is basically saying that this prophecy is about Muhammad. So the Isaiah 42 prophecy, they start out right away saying that the opening chapter is talking about Muhammad. So I have actually consulted one of my Orthodox Jewish friends, and they have done some pretty good research for me. So I did my own exegesis of Isaiah 42 and ran it past them, and they added a few things on top of what I was able to see. So I'm just going to jump into reading it. I want you guys to compare this to what it is that you know about Muhammad. We're only going to do this in the very first part of this. We're going to get into geography, which will be our next video, because that's going to require me pulling up quite a bit of geography, and I don't want to make this video too terribly long, so we'll try to stay on one topic at a time. All right. So again, the Muslims say that you can find Isaiah written about, or Muhammad written about, in the book of Isaiah. So we're just going to take this verse by verse, and we're going to talk about what the meaning of it is and if it can possibly apply to Muhammad. So chapter 42, verse 1, it says, "Behold, my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him, and he will bring forth justice to the nations." One of the first things that I found really, really interesting, actually, when I was talking to my Jewish friend, is they said that this is actually a messianic prophecy. So this prophecy right here is, so when they say my servant who I uphold, they are actually talking about the Messiah. All right. So what I want us to think about is when we hear the word servant, my chosen one, a delightful to God's Spirit, an anointed with God's Spirit, that's who we're going to be thinking about. So does Muhammad fit that bill? Was he a chosen one? Was the Spirit of God placed upon him? Is he anointed by God's Spirit? And from the Jewish perspective, is he the Messiah? And even Muhammad himself actually claims not to be the Messiah. And if we want to take a really good look at what the Muslims, they say Jesus or Isa is the Messiah. So right away, actually, there's kind of a refutation. They refute themselves, especially if you're taking a look at this from an Orthodox Jewish perspective. Okay, so what we're going to be looking for is someone who is evidenced as a servant, someone who God has chosen, delightful, and anointed, and who brings justice to all the nations. There's actually really something pretty interesting in here as well, as this passage is making an allusion to one of the Psalms. So Psalm 135 verse 4 says, "For the Lord has chosen Jacob," right? And Jacob is the son of Isaac, who's the son of Abraham. And Jacob was named Israel, renamed Israel. So when it says, "For the Lord has chosen Jacob," they're saying Israel, "for himself." So Israel is for himself. And he actually says Israel, and it says Israel as his treasured possession. Some things that we want to pay attention to, actually, is it says that he will bring forth justice to all the nations. So we have to ask ourselves, what is justice? How do we define justice, right? Well, justice, I can say, especially in this passage of Isaiah, is relative to the law, or the law of Moses, which is found in the Torah, right? So that's the law that we're talking about. So for the source of this practice, we must look at defining justice according to the Bible. We will use the revelation of God in the Torah as a means to determine justice in the sense of the servant. So is the servant bringing forth justice in line with what the law is in the Torah? Does the servant know what the law is in the Torah? And I will actually argue that Muhammad doesn't actually know what the laws are in the Torah. Okay, so moving on to verse 2, it says, "He," which is the servant, "will not cry aloud or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street." So right away, we see that this servant is going to be very humble and soft spoken. So I want to ask you guys, do you think that Muhammad was humble and soft spoken, or was he riding out, conquering lands, killing people, those types of things? I want us to keep that into mind. All right. So what's interesting also is the Orthodox Jewish understanding is that this passage still is talking about the Messiah, and is saying that the Messiah will not need to go out and shout at all of the other nations, which Muhammad did, right? Muhammad went out and started conquering and shouting at all of these other nations. But this is refuting that, because Muhammad, it's basically saying that this servant, who is the Messiah, which Muhammad is not, is going to not go out and conquer. In fact, the nations are going to seek him out and to draw wisdom into him. All right, so this passage is actually mirrored in Zechariah chapter 8, verse 23, which says, "Thus said the Lord of hosts, in those days 10 men from nations of every tongue will take hold, when they take hold of every Jew by a corner of his cloak and say, 'Let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you.'" As soon as I hear the phrase take hold of the corner of their cloak, I think of Jesus, actually. I think of Jesus, because Christians, we obviously believe he is the Messiah. Also, Muslims believe that he is the Messiah, and there is a story about him when a woman who has been plagued with basically menstrual bleeding for, I think, the past 12 years grabs hold of his coat. And, there's actually a lot of other nations, so Centurions and Romans and Sumerians and a lot of different nationalities of people do come. They bring themselves to Jesus and ask him for advice, essentially. So this actually, and I never realized this before I started looking into this, was this actually could be very prophetic in describing the life of Jesus. All right, so moving on to verse 3, it says, "A bruised reed he will not break, and a faintly burning wick he will not quench. He will faithfully bring forth justice." There's actually a couple of ways that you can interpret this, and I believe that it does actually have a double meaning behind it, as many of the things in the Bible do. Okay, so we know that this servant is going to be like a bruised reed. Okay, so it's someone who is going to be harmed, but they will not break. And it seems like they're going to face some sort of persecution or violence of some kind. So another description that they kind of add on top of that is a faintly burning wick. And they might be someone who a lot of people won't notice, right? Because the faintly burning wick, you're not going to see that candle if it's not burning super brightly. So they're just going to burn just brightly enough. So that wick of light will not quench, however. Okay. So although you might not see the light at the time of their life, that light that they have will not be quenched. Okay. So it continues saying that he will bring forth justice. And again, we have to focus on what that justice means. How will that justice be brought apart? And like I said, this actually might have a double meaning in it, because it's not only that he might be a bruised reed or a dimly lit wick. It could also be talking about, and again, like I said, I think this is talking in both directions here, is that he himself will not break a bruised reed. He's not going to attack people who are weaker than he. He's not going to put out the light of those who barely have a dim light. So what I think this is talking about is a Messiah or a messenger or a servant who's going to be very humble. They're not going to be out shouting in the streets. They're not going to be out conquering lands or squashing people who are weaker than them. And in fact, they're going to be lifting them up. So as I've been reading this, guys, I've been more and more convinced that this is actually talking about Jesus. And I'm becoming more and more convinced that this is not talking about Muhammad, because so far, this does not fit the description of Muhammad, not from the Christian perspective, and also not from the Orthodox Jewish perspective. So we're going to move on to verse 4, and it says, "He will not grow faint or be discouraged until he has established justice in the earth, and the coastlands wait for his laws." So the servant is going to keep on burning, right? It's going to keep on going and will not grow faint or be discouraged. A key phrase that I see here is he will not grow faint or be discouraged, and he won't until he has established justice on all of the earth. Okay, so this servant must be fitting this criteria, and we have to continue to think about this. Again, you know my opinion. I think this is talking about Jesus. I think this is depicting the cross. I think this is depicting the resurrection. I think this is depicting the fact that no other Jewish person has brought more attention to the laws of the God of Israel. There's been no one else who all nations at least know about him. All nations come to at least address Jesus in some way, form, or fashion, and he has influenced what they believe is justice in many, many ways. All right, so moving on to verse 5, we see, "Thus says God the Lord, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and what comes from it, who gives breath to the people on it and a spirit to those who walk in it." So that is verse number 5. So this is basically, this is when God starts to speak. This is when Yahweh starts to speak about himself. So we'll just move right on to verse 6, where he says, "I am the Lord, I have called you in righteousness, and I will take you by the hand and keep you. I will give you as a covenant for the people and a light to the nations." There is a lot to unpack here, guys. So again, this is Yahweh speaking. This is him saying that I am the Lord, right? I have called you in my righteousness. So the you, we're going to go ahead and keep saying, is that servant, is that Messiah figure. So he has called him in righteousness and will take you by the hand and keep you, right? So that's another hint at what's going on with Jesus, right? So Yahweh is saying, I will take you by the hand and keep you, right? This is prophesied in Daniel, and this is obviously fulfilled in the life of Jesus when he ascends back up to the right hand of the Father. Here's something that gives me chills when I actually read it. After it says, "I will take you by the hand," it says, "I will give you as a covenant for the people." So this Messiah is going to be given to them, right? As a covenant. That's what's the New Testament, the new covenant. That is what Jesus is talking about. He is the one who's fulfilling all of these old covenantal requirements so that we can move forward into the new covenant. And he himself is the one who is the covenant, right? So we'll just move on to verse number 7, and it says, so I'm going to read kind of verse 6 because it is a continuation. "So I will give you as a covenant for the people, a light for the nations," continuing now on to verse 7, "to open the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, from the prison, those who sit in darkness." If you guys know anything about the life of Jesus, you will know that one of the many miracles that he does is he gives sight to the blind. So when it says right here in verse 7, to open the eyes that are blind, that is one of the things that Jesus does, to bring out prisoners from the dungeon, from the prison, those who sit in darkness, right? So we can tell that the sitting in darkness in a prison is a spiritual darkness, and a spiritual type of prison. And that is essentially why he is given as a covenant, to save those of us who are sinners, who are not righteous, and give us the free gift of eternal life, so willing as we are able and willing to accept it. All right, so moving on to verse 8 is we see that he says, "I am the Lord, that is my name. My glory I give to no other, nor my praise to carved idols." So keep in mind that we've been talking about the Messiah here. So it says again, "I am the Lord." Okay, that is my name, and my glory I give to no other, nor my praise to carved images. Okay, so this one is kind of crazy to me as well. I think this is really, really interesting. So Yahweh is obviously focused on proclaiming that he, Yahweh, is his name, and he does not go by any other name. Okay, Allah, I don't think so. And he wants us to know that he is the God to be worshipped. See, my glory, Yahweh says, I give to no other. Right? So he's not going to give his glory to anything, carved images, nothing. Okay? But this passage is still referring to the Messiah. Give my image, my blah, 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 right? So if this passage is referring to Messiah, it would stand to reason that the Messiah, who is glorified, is actually Yahweh himself. We're actually starting to look into hints of deity when it comes to the Messiah, right? I give to no other. So if Yahweh doesn't give glory to anyone else and he gives it to the Messiah, what does that say about who the Messiah is? Well, it's pretty clear to me that the Messiah is someone who gets glory from Yahweh, but also he wouldn't give it to anyone besides himself. So that means that there is a divine type of Messiah figure that we can start to read about here in our Old Testament in Isaiah 42. Again, this is starting to look to me a lot more like it would be fitting of Jesus and a lot less like it would be befitting of Muhammad, especially because Muhammad obviously doesn't know the name of the God of Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He doesn't know that his name is Yahweh. Of the 99 names that Allah has, not a single one of them even reflects or alludes to his name in the Hebrew. Okay, so moving on to the last part of this section before we get going. So it says in verse 9 that, behold, the former things have come to pass, and new things I now declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. So we know that this messenger, behold, the former things have come to pass. Right? So when Jesus says, nothing from the law is going to pass until all is fulfilled, that could be making reference right here, guys, to this particular chapter. And he himself, right, we talked about this up in verse 6, where he says, I will give you, the Messiah, as a covenant for the people, and old things are going to come to pass. Now we're in verse 9. And new things I now declare. Before they spring forth, I will tell you of them. Okay? So John the Baptist came to proclaim the coming of the Messiah. And B, Jesus himself proclaimed that all of these new things were going to come to pass. All right, guys. So that's all I have from this particular section. I want you to really think about if this fits Muhammad. I would love to read what you think about it, even if you want to start to think about or talk about if it fits Jesus, why or why not. And then the next section we're going to get into actually includes, and this is where a lot of Muslims do think that it's talking about Muhammad, because it talks about some geographic locations, such as Kedar, and Sila, and I don't know if they talk about Mount Paran or not. I'll have to look into that. I can't remember. But a lot of Muslims seem to think that those are locations down in Mecca. So I'm going to go into some geography for us all, and we're going to pay a lot of attention to what kind of geography we have going on in that land at that time, and if it could even possibly be considered Mecca or even Medina. And guess what? It's not. But you'll get to wait and see. I will give you proof for all of those types of things. Okay, guys? So thank you so much for watching. And I want you guys to know something super important. Jesus loves you. Have a good one.